Hi, we're back here today at Nene's Nest, where I'm going to be reading another one of our stories about Curious George by Margaret and H.A. Rye. There are the names of the authors. And this is called Curious George's Dream. And if you love stories like Curious George or the stories about Arthur and other favorite characters, I hope you will share this with your friends. Like this story at the end. And even right now, you can go and subscribe to this channel, Nene's Nest. I'm a grandmother and I like to read stories to kids. So let's go on the inside and see the big roller coaster. So we know that's going to be part of the story of George and the man with the yellow hat. So let me begin here at the beginning, and you just follow along and see what's going to happen. This is George. George was a good little monkey and always very curious. After a long day at the amusement park with his friend, the man with the yellow hat, George was tired and glad to be at home. Soon, dinner was ready, but when George sat down to eat, he was too small to reach his plate. "I'm sorry," the man said. "I forgot to fix your chair." He put a large book on George's chair, and George climbed up. As he sat on the book that was set on his chair, George thought about his day. All day long, he had been too small. "Your hands are too little to hold these baby bunnies," the manager of the petting zoo told him. "I'm sorry," said the man operating the carousel. "I cannot let you on. You need a grown-up to ride with you." "Maybe next year," said the man, taking tickets at the roller coaster, because the sign says you must be this tall, and he was just a little bit short for the measurement. But after a good meal and a good dessert, George began to feel better. When the dishes were finished, the man said, "George, I have a surprise for you." And they went into the living room. The surprise was a movie. George was glad to watch a movie. That was something he was not too small to do. George was enjoying the movie, but it had been a full day and now he had a full stomach. Soon he could not keep his eyes open. The next thing George knew, he was back at the petting zoo. But this time something was different. The petting zoo was very small. In fact, everything was small. George looked around. Then he looked at himself. Maybe everything wasn't so small after all, he thought. Maybe he was big. See the word big? Uh-oh, this is not right, thought George. Then he remembered the bunnies. Why, he was not too small to hold a bunny now. He was not too small to do anything. What fun, George thought, and he went to the bunny hutch. Now George could hold lots of bunnies, and he cuddled them to his face. The bunnies liked George. But the manager of the petting zoo did not. "Put those bunnies down," she said. "You'll scare them. You're too big." George didn't want to scare the bunnies, so he put them down and turned to go. Then George saw the roller coaster. He was curious. Was he big enough to ride it now? Of course he was big enough. If only he could find a seat big enough for him. But the man taking tickets made George leave. "You cannot ride this ride," he said. "You are too big." George was sad he could not ride, but he did as he was told. "Catch that monkey," someone yelled as George was leaving the roller coaster. "He's dangerous." People in the park became frightened. They began to run. They ran in all directions, but mostly they ran away from George. George felt awful. He didn't want to frighten anyone. He just wanted to hide, but where could he go? He was too big to fit anywhere. Then George saw the carousel. He wouldn't need a grown-up to get on with him this time. But this time George wished he had a grown-up with him. He wished his friend were here. George sat on the carousel, feeling lonely. Suddenly someone called his name. George! George! It sounded like the man with the yellow hat. Could his friend be here to take him home? George heard his name again. It was his friend. George wanted to jump into his friend's arms, but the man with the yellow hat was too small. How could he ever take George home now? The man called his name again. George, he said, wake up. It's time for bed. You fell asleep watching the movie. George looked at his friend. Why, he wasn't small after all. George looked at himself. He was not big. Now George could jump into his friend's arms, and that is what he did. As the man with the yellow hat tucked him in, George was happy to be in his little bed. It was not very big, he thought, but he fit in it perfectly. George was just the right size. What a great ending to this story about George's dream on the sofa. Sometimes I fall asleep on the sofa watching TV. Maybe you have done this as well. But I love the stories because they always end well for George. He gets in some trouble, but he always seems to have a good ending to his day. I hope you do too. See you soon.